Yeah, so I'm sure many of us with common sense, which I've grown increasingly aware is not the majority of the population, might have noticed the last year, especially over in Yankee Land, the colossal pile of screw ups in 2021. Quite sure a few, much like myself, have wondered what in the hell is wrong with politicians. I mean, in the last year especially, not just overall. Sure, we have complete morons like AOC and Elizabeth Warren, who I've seen on a website was called the stupidest person in Congress, and considering AOC is also on that list, Pocahontas, that is quite the impressive achievement. By the way, shouldn't she lose points for culturally appropriating a bloodline or something? Anyway, I've long since felt politicians are more malicious than they are stupid, but in 2021, yeah, I'm sort of having second thoughts about that opinion. I may need to go back to the drawing board on that one. And if that's how stupid they are, just think of how stupid their constituents must be. I am fucking amazed Democratic government has lasted this long, especially in the last 2 years. Many a sheep are just willingly walking into the mouth of the wolf. Hell, recently I even saw Styx commenting on this, saying, and these people all vote. That's a problem. I thought, oh great, even Styx is acknowledging the destination. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. In the resulting train wreck dumpster fire that's seen a downward spiral of Democratic approval, much to the surprise of no one with an IQ higher than a ham sandwich, we're left puzzled with the party doubling down, full force, sixth gearing everything that has caused their demise in the prior 12 months. Why? It defies any and all action of a rational human being when viewed from the outside. So I thought we'd go through this article that helpfully explains, quite well I might add, why the Democrats are, well, frankly, insane. The Democrats are more dangerous than ever. Preaching to the choir there, pal. We're off to a good start. The most striking thing about the collapse of Joe Biden's legislative agenda is how unsurprising it is. It's not exactly a massive shocker. You have an increasingly unpopular president who's essentially trapped in a race against time between his memory and polling numbers over who can drop the fastest. Regardless of who wins that race, Biden is still going to end up losing, who, thanks to his own incompetence, has created a scorching list of problems that he's also promised to fix using America's tax dollars during the worst inflation crisis in 4 decades with a 50-50 split Senate. Geez, who couldn't see the trouble coming? It was always a distinct possibility that Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat from a conservative state, would reject the president's flagship Build Back Better bill. Congress has already approved more than $6 trillion in additional spending since the start of the pandemic. Inflation is at a 40-year high, and the spending package was unpopular in Manchin's home state of West Virginia, not least because it threatened the energy industries on which many West Virginians' livelihoods depend. Yes, who would have thought a state with a reliance of over 90% dependence on coal for their energy aren't exactly keen on a piece of legislation that wants to get off this stuff and make way for a crushingly expensive and ineffective alternative, or during a surging energy crisis. Again, shocking. But even those who disapprove of the Build Back Bolshevik fate must surely see that this is America's political system functioning as it's supposed to function. Ah, the glowing optimism there. That might have made sense if the country's current steward wasn't a marionette with a brain trapped in the 70s and a hyper-polarized environment where the morons on the left think anyone who opposes them are Satan's minions. And I'm not even addressing the fact that many of these people would fail a civics test. Biden's legislation can't even get the support of half the Senate, and so it won't become law. This is standard Washington fare. It is politics as it has always been. Yeah, about that. Has anyone else noticed that some of the biggest proponents of the woke crap are younger and female, and not white? I wonder why. However, to listen to Democrats in the days since Manchin delivered his fatal blow is to be left with a very different impression. According to their version of events, the senator's decision is tantamount to a crisis for American democracy. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news the last few months, especially in the latter half of the last year, you will notice this phrase, American democracy, is in, I would guess, about half of the corporate news pieces. There is at least one piece on something related to this on Real Clear Politics every damn day. Case in point, this is from Tuesday, right there. I didn't get Wednesday's one, but here's Thursday's. Here, and here. And here's today's ones. There, and there. This is the most propagandistic phrase you will see in the news today. And considering the left's pernicious trick of perverting language for their own nefarious purposes, one quick glance at an article where this headline is used, you will quickly realize they don't use the standard definition of that phrase here either. And it's always about Trump, because these people think about Trump constantly, like a psychotic ex-girlfriend desperate to get attention. It's because they are wetting themselves on the hour at the prospect of this man getting back into the White House, which, seeing as the Democrats are failing miserably on every level, it makes his return to the White House that much more inevitable by the day. After more than 4 years, they still have nothing policy-wise to attack Trump on. The only arrow in their quiver is this piss-poor, impotent shot on American democracy. This is why they're so hell-bent on destroying the voting integrity, because if they can't emulate the stunt they pulled in 2020, they're screwed. And if it isn't Trump, it'll be DeSantis, which is why they bash him. You will see Florida is in the news constantly, because they wield this dangerous thing called freedom, and allowing citizens to make their own decisions about their lives and their families is a terrifying prospect to any and all progressive goals. Trust me, the Democrats and the corporate press do not give a flying squirrel's ass about COVID at all. AOC's been caught there, Don Lemon and his gay-ass boyfriend was caught there a few months ago. DeSantis met the press a few days ago and said there's a load of Democratic politicians, mayors, governors, whatever, who show up to holiday in Florida, so they know it's just a power-grabbing sham. DeSantis represents a threat to the status quo, and that's all. He's a more politically astute and more charming version of Trump. Here's a good analogy. Watching the Democrats is like watching the weakest link. There will come a point where they attack the strongest, smartest person because they represent the biggest threat. So the weakest will gang up on the strongest individual. To the left, anyone who opposes them are evil and must be eliminated for the good of society. The current crop of Democrats, or at least a sizable portion, are straight-up communists. From education, to energy, to social issues, to crime, to the economy, to immigration, these people are straight-up centralized control of everything. And anyone opposed to this nightmarish dystopia concoction is a threat to quote-unquote American democracy. They are partisan totalitarians, simple as that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, otherwise known as that ninny with a bucket of bleach for a brain, has said that our entire democracy is on the line. Yeah, but she's literally retarded, so no one should ever listen to her. To fix this, she wants to crack down on the very privileged, very entitled, and very protected Senate. I am having a hard time finding a more apt phrase to describe her to a T. Chuck Schumer, notionally in charge of Senate Democrats, responded to Manchin's decision with the promise that the upper chamber will vote on a bill that would overhaul U.S. voting laws as soon as it is back from a Christmas recess. Oh yeah, let's add voting rights quote-unquote to the list of things centralized as well. Even before Manchin doomed Biden's agenda, calls for changes to the rules governing America's system of government, small changes, others profound, had grown louder as the prospect of Build Back Better faded. Last week, Pocahontas introduced a bill to pack the Supreme Court with additional justices. The current court, she argued, threatens the democratic foundations of our nation. Ugh, talk about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. In Democrat-supporting parts of the media, the tone is no less alarmist. Isn't that just the understatement of the century? Jennifer Rubin, the West Wing's favorite columnist, argued in the Washington Post that the failure of Build Back Better puts democracy itself in a precarious position. See? There it is again, what I tell you. She emphasized the Democrats' hopes for 2022 and the fate of our democracy, dependent on the president's ability to reconstruct an agenda he can actually deliver, aka code for our current agenda is not popular and we don't have the numbers to shove it down America's throat. And if we don't get our way, we'll continue the previously mentioned tradition of screeching to the high heavens with our hair on fire. In one sense, she is right. Their legislative disappointment is a chance for the Democrats to face a banal, if frustrating reality, that Biden was not elected with a mandate for transformative legislation, that the party has only the loosest grip on the legislative branch, and that America simply isn't crying out for the progressive reforms that most of the party favors. Yes, because anytime politicians agree on anything, it is at the expense of everyone else, because they are a fraudulent thieving entity running on everyone else's money. But facing unpleasant facts isn't fun. That depends on what side of the aisle you're on. If you're a smug bastard like myself and you think you're never wrong, it is at the very least rather amusing. Hence why Democrats appear to be slipping further into their own delusions, processing Manchin's obstinance as a crisis that imperils not just their own electoral fortunes, but the future of the Republic. And hence why what should be a moderating moment looks likely to have a radicalizing effect. Their own legislative impotence persuading a party already comfortable with an apocalyptic register to dial up the doom and gloom to 11. This, to me, was fascinating because if you apply this explanation to their realization that the natural course of a virus's evolution is going to kill off their own justification for the COVID emergency powers, you can make sense of this too using that theory. Such a response can, of course, be understood on an emotional level. You are more likely to complain about the quality of the refereeing when you're losing, but it is also worth appreciating on a political level. The Democratic 2020 victory was built on the unpopularity of Donald Trump. Actually, I sort of disagree with this. I think it was more built on the media fomenting a reality that didn't exist purely to boost their own ratings, as it became abundantly clear that bitching all day draws in more people than actual policy discussions because A, people are stupid, B, policy discussions require them to have an attention span longer than what it takes to read a tweet, and C, Trump was surprisingly effective when it came to being president, and reporting on the boom of the economy would have made him a very popular president, and that goes against the corporate press narrative. Without that, it is far from clear that they can put together a coalition of voters broad enough to hold on to both chambers of Congress and the White House. And so, with the legislative agenda foundering, it is time to return to something they can all agree on: the wickedness of the other side. Yeah, if those polling numbers are anything to go by, and we know they oversampled Democrats to make it look like Biden is not a floating corpse, the endless self-inflicted wounds and the spending to fix them is not going to work because, as this administration has clearly shown, the answer to incompetent governance is not more governance. None of this is to say that there aren't threats to American democracy from the Trumpist right. There isn't, by the way. You might have noticed this, but one of the staple mantras of the Trumpist right is "leave us the hell alone." The last president spent months between the election and Biden's inauguration doing everything he could to stay in power. Insert Hillary Clinton saying Biden must not concede under any circumstances. Given the election night shenanigans and the resulting piss-poor Democratic Party performance, one is hardly left wondering why she said such a thing. Any sensible reforms to the rules governing Washington would safeguard against something similar happening again. You lost me at the word sensible involving anything with governing Washington. Good luck to you, pal. But that danger to America's electoral system only makes the Democrats focus on the largely unrelated question of voting rights and their overblown rhetoric of voter suppression and Jim Crow 2.0 more baffling and less excusable. Instead of tailoring their pro-democracy agenda to the dangers that surround post-election certification, the party is plowing ahead with a bill that would federalize voting rules in response to somewhat mostly inane changes at a state level. Elsewhere, Democrats want to overturn the rules that govern the Senate, and if Warren is anything to go by, take the extraordinary step of rebalancing the Supreme Court, simply because progressives aren't satisfied by its current composition. Yet they're called radical left for a reason. As the center-left commentator Matthew Iglesias has observed, Democrats certainly aren't acting as though they believe that the future of democracy is in peril. If they did, they'd surely shelve party political concerns and build as broad a coalition as possible to combat the Trumpist threat. That might be true, but lest we forget, these people think they are right about everything, and if they concede even a millimeter of ground, the world is going to die. Did I mention this crap is being pushed by non-white women? I feel like that's an important point I want to stress over and over again. The dark irony of the Democrat predicament is that they could end up being right for the wrong reasons. There is a chance, after all, that the failure of Build Back Better really is bad news for American democracy, but only because it radicalizes their own side. Even as the far-left Democrats are right about something, they still end up being the losers. You gotta love it. A universe in which Biden and other Democratic lawmakers listen to Manchin's complaints about the legislation, attempt to understand the concerns of the voters he represents, without whom the Senate would be in Republican hands, and steer themselves back towards the center feels a long way away. You can say that again. Biden, for his part, has taken a tough line all along. According to the Washington Post, the White House rejected an offer from Manchin that included the vast majority of the bill's provisions. That just makes Biden, or more to the point his progressive handlers, shall we say, look like a stubborn jackass. He was sold as someone who could heal the divide and bring people together. Now, obviously, that was never going to materialize because he has no will or mind of his own, and he can't even bloody well get that right. Actually, no, I take that back. He can unite people, but just all against him. In a strange kind of way, he's sort of taken on the Trump role as the galvanized figure to hate, except when it was Trump, it was the media artificially conjuring up the rage for vacuous reasons. Under Biden, it's his sheer stupid incompetence that's creating coalitions against him. It's more organic in Biden's case because the problems facing the country are actually real. Now the West Virginian has walked away. They appear to be perusing a vindictive scorched earth strategy. Faced with Manchin's exasperations, Democrats cry foul, accusing him of being a corrupt coal boss and choosing to ignore the obvious fact that the legislation would have been very unpopular in his home state. I may do a video on that actually. Again, the clear, normal, predictable explanation is spurned in favor of a more alarmist narrative. I love this so much. It is just so self-defeating on the part of the Democrats. You don't have weight to throw around, Dems. Despite your party having all three branches of government, you suck at absolutely everything you have done thus far. You don't have a majority without Manchin, and dealing with a blue senator in an overwhelmingly red state, you strategically absent-minded dolts are abusing him. The depths of their stupidity is mind-boggling. Not to mention, do you know what kind of subsidies green energy will get from the government because green energy really sucks? They've gotten around $150 billion worth of subsidies in about 3 decades. And how much more efficient has that gotten? Has the taxpayer gotten a good return on the investment? I think not. And can you take a wild guess at which party green energy firms lobbies to? I wonder which. So clearly, Democrats don't really care about corporate subsidies and stealing people's money. As long as it's for a cause they approve of, they don't give a crap. Democrats are simply the party of snakes. Biden himself is certainly capable of overblown rhetoric about the future of American democracy, but so far he has mostly resisted calls from Democrats to go nuclear and change the rules that govern Washington to favor his own party, because it would likely make its way to the courts and be shot down if he tried. That refusal grows harder by the day. Many in his party are rightly concerned that their country is stuck in a downward spiral, but they cannot see their own part in the process. Or is it because they are psychopaths who don't care? The mind she boggles. Increasingly, both sides view anything other than victory for themselves as illegitimate. Well, not to be too biased myself as a Trump fan, you can sort of see why. Their case is rock solid. Look at the country under Biden versus Trump. Broken border, sky-high inflation, runaway energy costs, pathetically begging OPEC to increase energy production, supply chain issues, and a defeated military, versus increased wages, tight immigration control, a booming economy, low unemployment, no runaway inflation, low energy costs, energy independence, and military might. Come on, this isn't exactly rocket science. One side is clearly better in literally every single way. And that's not a partisan bias. You can measure that objectively. A party that responds to its own perfectly normal legislative woes by doubling down on an all-out battle to rewrite the rules of the system in its favor is not serious about ending that descent into anarchy. And so the more impotent the Democrats feel, the more dangerous they become. Indeed, if only they could nuke themselves into orbit and not drag everyone else to smithereens along with their stupidly self-destructive policies. And that's all for today. Until next time.